This happened around 3 years ago. We went on a school bus trip to Wales where we stayed at this place where we did many activities. It was extremely fun. I can still remember the last thing as clear as day. Anyways, we first spotted this man while rock climbing. Next to us was this forest. One of my friends saw some figure at the edge of it looking at us, and when he told me, a lot more of my peers started to notice. We told our instructor that someone was there, and since it was a private property, he and a colleague of his went to check it out. They came back, not finding anyone. The second time we saw this man was when some peers of mine ran away into the forest during orienteering to make out. They said that they saw someone under the lamppost with a bike just standing there and looking at them. I also had an encounter with this man. This was when we were sleeping around 12 to 1 a.m. and two of my friends, one sharing a bunk bed with me and the other on another bunk bed. I went to the toilet and suddenly the light turned off while I was pissing. I was so scared. When I came out, I started screaming at my friends, and to cool off, I was sitting on the windowsill looking out. Our window looked out to the forest. I saw the man, and he saw me. He was wearing a black long coat, and I could barely see him in the moonlight, but I could tell he was looking at me. Then, he started walking back into the forest. That was the last time I saw him, and I think anyone else had, that year. This story didn't technically happen to me directly, though as a manager of the establishment it happened at, I feel I was involved. This happened a little over 5 years ago, the opening week that the new It movie was released. A little backstory first. I work as the assistant manager at a movie theater. This isn't a big chain theater like Cinemark or Regal. It's a family-owned company that only has 6 locations. A friend of mine who also works at the theater, Kath, works as a floor employee selling tickets, picking up trash during the day, working the concession stand, etc. Another position available at our theater is a cleaner. These are workers who come in around 7 a.m. and clean the theater before we open, so that everything is nice and tidy before the moviegoers rush to the box office. Floor employees who want to get some extra hours can opt to come in and work as cleaners as well. Kath briefly took up this position for a couple of months when she was short on money and needed a little extra cash. After those few months, she decided to give it up, since she was getting tired and would often have to work later in the night and wasn't feeling it anymore. One day, about a month after Kath had stopped working as a cleaner, the cleaners were hard at work, as the new It movie had just come out and the theaters from the night before were most likely trashed. One cleaner, Deb, was taking out bags of trash. There are exit doors that lead to the back of the building where the dumpsters are. As she walked out the back door of one of the theaters, she said she noticed a figure standing out back. There is a short wooded area behind the theater, and there is also a small clearing that faces the back of the building. The figure was standing in this area. It's far enough away that one might not be able to make out much detail. She didn't think much of it at first, as it is not uncommon for homeless people to hang out back there since it's fairly secluded. Deb made her way to the dumpster and tossed the bags in. Right as she finished and turned around to head back to the exit door, a man, she claims was roughly in his 30s, was standing just a few feet away from her, completely decked out in clown attire, holding a balloon and everything. To say the least, it scared the hell out of her. Deb isn't a soft woman. She's definitely the kind that wouldn't be afraid to put you in your place. She started berating and cursing at the clown. "What the fuck? What are you doing? You shouldn't be out here scaring the shit out of people like that," etc. The clown replied, "I'm actually here to scare Kath, see? But I figured since I'm here, I'd go ahead and scare anyone I see anyway." Freaked out, she marched back to the theater and didn't see him again. This is the freaky part though. Kath had no idea who that person could possibly be. She opened the day this happened, only about 3 hours after the incident, and was on edge and freaked out the entire shift after she had been told what happened. She refused to take out the trash during her shift, and even had 2 coworkers, including myself, walk her to her vehicle at the end of her shift. Whoever did this, and was targeting her, had to somehow know her well enough to know that she had worked as a cleaner in the morning, but not close enough to realize that she had stopped working as a cleaner at least a month ago. To this day, Kath still has no idea who it was. A couple theories have popped up, including her boyfriend. Though, my coworkers and I have met him, and it's easy to say he's not the type to pull something like this. Also, they live with each other, and she would obviously realize if he wasn't home in the morning before her shift. I talked with everyone about this to try to get to the bottom of it. The cleaner, Deb, claims that the man looked like the spitting image of the clown from It, and was horrifying. We do have cameras out back now, but they are recently installed and are rough quality, so either they hadn't been put up at this point, or our general manager tried to look at the footage and couldn't make out what was happening that far away from the camera. So, creepy It impersonator, let's not meet, ever, and please don't mess with my friend again. This happened a few weeks ago. I work at a petrol station. I have years of experience in a previous one, so getting this job was just a piece of cake, I guess. Only, this was different. It's lone working. Can you imagine 8 hours entirely by yourself, especially doing late shifts? So, my shift started early afternoon. About maybe half an hour into my shift, this guy walks in. I seen him before as he entered the shop the day before, and randomly asked me if I had any shopping bags to spare. The guy was giving me some uncomfortable vibes, but luckily someone else was working with me that day for a short while, so I asked them to deal with that guy. My colleague said we don't have anything to spare, and told him bye. The guy leaves. Anyway, back to this very day. The guy walks in and I thought to myself, what in the world could he want now? Another handout? And of course, he just walks up to the desk and starts chatting to me. He was asking me some advice about his living situation, as he told me he used to be homeless. Since to me it's not really my place to give advice, plus I just didn't really want to be stuck talking to this guy, I just shrugged and told him to sleep on it, and then have a think about things. Of course, he left. He didn't enter the store to buy anything at all, just chat. But thinking back, I remembered him asking me what time I got off, and stupidly I told him, 11 o'clock tonight. I got on with my shift as usual, up until 9:30 p.m. He returns, but with another guy who, may I say, looked dodgy, all dressed in black with his hood up. The guy who entered the shop previously pokes his head into the door and asks if I do phone top-ups. We do, but something in my gut was telling me, make him leave now. So I lied and told him we don't. So the guy and his dodgy friend hung outside the store for a bit while I served other customers until the shop seemed quiet. Again, they both entered the store and they started looking around the shop. I noticed the dodgy guy kept his hands in his pockets the whole time. And then the thought struck me, oh no, I'm getting robbed tonight. So I took some deep breaths and tried to calm down and just thought of my training. I repeated in my head, just comply, give them what they want, and then call the police after they leave. But of course, from the panic, I thought to myself a better plan. So I stood ready with one hand under the desk, hovering over the panic button. I thought to myself, the minute they pull a weapon on me, hit the button, show hands, comply, and hope the police arrive on time to catch them. Well, they just ended up buying a bottle of water. And of course, I did notice there was someone still outside in their car. I felt a huge sigh of relief, thinking they just wanted water. Or they decided not to rob me because there's another person outside. They both leave the store, but again, hang around outside, right by the door. Then I see the car drive away and thought to myself, I don't want these guys in the store again, not while I'm completely alone. So I flip the switch that automatically locks the main door. Half an hour passes. I had no customers, and still, the two guys are hanging around outside. I call my boss to tell him what's going on, and to give him a heads up that at some point I'm going to have to call the police to have them move the two men along, and it's making me very anxious. Then, another guy shows up, and joins the guys all dressed in black, wearing those COVID masks. He hands his friends masks as well, and then makes his way around the back of the store. Then I realized, oh no, the back door. The one I go out from to puff on my vape. I ran to the back door, slammed it shut, and locked it. At this point, I was scared for my life. These guys had stacked around the place for which felt like an hour and a half. I hid in the office watching the cameras. I picked up the phone and dialed the non-emergency number for the police. At this point, I was really freaking out, but I had to listen carefully while I was on the phone because I was going through those "press 1 for this" prompts and I couldn't focus on the next thing. Then a colleague calls me on my cell phone to check in on me. I told him what was happening. Then I came out the office to take a peek, and of course, those guys were right up to the window, knocking to grab my attention. And yes, they saw me with 2 phones to my ears. "Oh no, they saw me," I said to my colleague on the phone. Then I came up with an idea. I put the phone I had making a call to the police down, and I kept my colleague on the other phone. I said, "Listen, I'm going to see what they want. Stay on the phone. I'm going to put you on speaker. Stay quiet. Don't say a word. Just listen. If you hear me say, 'The till is slow,' you hang up and call the police. 999, okay? I mean it. That's me telling you I'm in danger." So I put him on speaker and hid my phone in my bra. I head to the window. "What's up, guys? Can I help you?" "Why is the door locked?" "That's because we're in night mode now. Doors are locked, but I can serve through the hatch." What can I get you?" They just look at each other and whisper amongst themselves. "We'll just take a pack of smokes and a lighter." "Sure, one moment." I grab what they ask for, and they push a 20 through. I quickly grab the 20, and of course check it. Then I rang them up, but as I had their change ready, I saw one hand through the hatch. I dropped their change into that hand, avoiding contact. "Okay, thank you, bye now." I stare them down. They finally leave for good. As soon as they were gone, I fell to the floor and burst out crying after holding in that fear for so long. I demanded that I be changed to morning shifts after that night, or I'm quitting. This is a story of my brief friendship with a guy that damn near stalked me, and I'm sharing it for some closure, I think. I started my freshman year of college at a university in my hometown. That's pretty nice. I'm not going to share too much about it. It has a smaller amount of students, but enough that you don't really run into people often. I lived on campus. I was only 17 at the time. I had Tinder, of course, as I was fresh out of a relationship and looked to experience new things in college. I matched with this boy, Asher, who seemed nice enough. Pretty socially awkward, but I never really minded because I have anxiety issues myself, and I'm really sympathetic to it. Because of that, I ignored a lot of warning signs I shouldn't have. We texted for a while. He seemed really nice and caring. He wanted to know a lot about me, which I wasn't too keen on sharing, but I told him the basics, so we texted kind of regularly. He lived on campus as well and invited me to hang out. At the time, things didn't seem too sketchy, so I was completely down. When I first met him, that's when things started to get uncomfortable. We hung out in his dorm, which was pretty standard overall. I got cozy with him on his couch. I'd say almost cuddling, but not quite. Still really standard. When we started talking more, I realized how uncomfortable things really were. He kept making comments that just put me off, but I tried to ignore them. Things like, "I've never cuddled anyone before. Sorry if I'm doing it wrong." And so many comments about how he already liked me and wanted me to stay forever. Weird word choice, but whatever. He's just trying to be nice. I'll let him down easy. I ended that hangout pretty quickly for some fake excuse and went right back to my room. He kept texting me and professing how much he was into me. I told him sorry, but I'm not looking for any kind of relationship, so I did not want to keep things romantic. A bad lie, but I'm very non-confrontational and didn't want to be mean. That's when things started to really get weird. He sent me this long paragraph saying about how it was okay that I didn't want a relationship now, and that he'd wait for me and save his virginity for me. We had never even talked about anything sexual, and I had never even told him that I liked him or flirted back. I just never turned him down. It was one of the creepiest messages I've ever received. Unfortunately, that was just the start of the weird things to come. He wouldn't leave me alone, even though I kept trying to de-escalate things, and I kept running into him all over campus. I wasn't sure how he suddenly was nearby when my classes ended, and I wasn't sure why suddenly we'd both be in the dining hall at the same times, even though I hadn't changed my regular routine, but I just tried to brush it off. Definitely a mistake. I ended up turning him down completely because I was getting creeped out, and I couldn't figure out how he wasn't understanding that I didn't want anything romantic or sexual with him. He started guilt-tripping me, telling me about how he was going to kill himself and no one was ever going to love him. I've been in a manipulative relationship in the past, and I recognized that behavior right away and shut it down. I told him I couldn't be friends with him, and in my head, that was that. He didn't reply for a while, but when he did, all hell broke loose. I was luckily out of town at the time for a concert, so that made me feel a lot better. He went off, sending me paragraph after paragraph about how horrible of a person I was, and how I was a slut and needed to get put in my place, etc. Regular nice guy things. I couldn't handle that. I just ignored it. Then, once the regret set in, he made it his mission to win my love, however possible. He apologized profusely, told me how he couldn't be alone and I was his only friend, and how much he loved me. Whatever. Terrible, but I didn't care about that. Then, I guess to prove his dedication, he did the creepiest thing yet. First, he told me he was outside of my room. We did not live in the same dorm building, and you can't get into the buildings unless you live there. I don't know who let him in. I wasn't there, and my roommate was out, so that was okay. I texted him back at that point and told him to leave and how wrong and creepy that was, and he pulled out his last resort. He just sends me a screenshot of my contact in his phone. On Apple devices, you can fill in tons of information and have a notes section. Everything was entirely full. He knew my home address, my room number on campus, my parents' and brothers' names, my pets' names, my schedule. It was terrifying because I'm a fairly private person. My Instagram is my only social media and I do not share that much on it. I don't think I'll ever find out how he discovered all of that about me. I blocked him on everything right away and reported him to the school. The school did nothing at all. I still see him on campus and he still tries to approach me when he sees me. I always duck and run. It's worked so far. So, to the terrifying Tinder match who may still be following me around to this day, let's not meet again. My friend, Kayla, and I are both girls. We were 13 and 12 years old at the time, but we were regularly mistaken for 17 or 18-year-olds. By this point in our lives, we'd been hit on by teenagers and full-grown men, assuming we were older a number of times. Anyways, we both took Irish step dancing classes. Our class got to be part of a St. Patrick's Day parade. Our dresses had no pockets to hold my cell phone, so I just told my mom to meet us where the parade ended, hoping she'd be able to figure out where that was because nobody had told us the parade route. Well, the parade ends, and my mom is nowhere in sight. Assuming she's waiting in the car in one of the huge parking lots, we go wandering amongst the cars, hoping to spot her. Halfway through the first lot, we spot a group of clowns behind us in the distance, walking in our general direction. Kayla was absolutely terrified of clowns, so she immediately crouched down in between the front ends of two parked cars that were facing each other, not wanting to look at them, not wanting them to see her. I quickly kneeled down too because I feel like an idiot, and we just sat there waiting silently, staring at the ground, until enough time passed that they'll be out of sight. After a few minutes, I suddenly get a weird feeling and turn around, only to see one of the clowns. A youngish man dressed like a hobo is standing right behind me, leaning over to get a better look at us. We both kind of scream and jump up, and I immediately whip around to make sure that there's not another one on the other side, completely trapping us. But there wasn't, thank God. Not knowing how long he'd been standing there looking at us, but hoping he'd just walked up, I made up some bullcrap excuse for why we were down there, like, "I guess that quarter must have rolled further than we thought, Kayla. I think it's gone for good." And then looked at the man and said, "Heh, we were just looking for the change she dropped." I'm sure it wasn't very convincing, but the weird thing is, the guy never said a word. He never actually asked why we were down there, and he didn't apologize for scaring us or anything. He just stared at us silently. I'd like to think that the look on his face was either just confusion or non-malice amusement. Like, I know exactly why you were hiding, but I think it's kind of funny this is freaking out your friend. But it was pretty much impossible to tell his actual expression because of the fake smile painted on his face, which is exactly why clowns are so disturbing in the first place. Not wanting to stick around and deal with him any longer, I grabbed Kayla's arm and quickly dragged her in the other direction since she was still staring at him in horror. When we finally looked behind us, the whole group of clowns was gone, and Kayla had to sit down again for a little while to calm down. We found my mom in the next parking lot, and she thought the story was kind of funny because Kayla always overreacted when she thought things were creepy. Honestly, the dude probably just saw us suddenly ducking down and wanted to know why we never came back up. Or he could tell that we were scared and told his friends, "Hey, watch this. I'm going to scare the bejesus out of these girls," since we didn't actually look like children. I'm thinking my friend's fear was just contagious, but I can't deny that I was terrified when I turned around and saw him standing so close because I never heard him walking. Still, he probably was nowhere near as creepy as the clowns in the circus my brother performed in. This is actually my stepmom's and her best friend's story. I have my own, but I'm so hesitant to drag some of them up that I'm hoping telling someone else's will open me up to it. My stepmom didn't like us much, but she told my sister and I this experience growing up to scare us out of being stupid. It was my family's stranger danger story. My stepmom, we'll call her Macy, grew up as a kind of privileged teen in the 70s. Her mom had moved their family over here to the States from England when she was about 9 years old. She went to a pretty nice high school in a really nice town. There, she made friends with a girl named Lily, who didn't exactly run with Macy's type of crowd, the popular stereotypical type. They really hit it off, and Lily would take Macy out to do her type of things: hiking, fishing, sailing, etc. Anyways, because of Lily's influence, the two of them would do stuff like that a good amount. One Sunday, they decided to go hike in some hills about an hour away. Macy put on what I'm sure were her extremely expensive hiking shoes, and the two of them drove off to the hiking trails. Lily parked in this big clearing with makeshift parking spots, but there were no other cars there. This was only important in hindsight. They started hiking up the hill, off the path because Lily fancied herself as something of a badass. The hike was nothing extraordinary though. Anyways, they reached the top of the hill and my stepmom was done. The polished, pampered side of her was coming out, and she groaned until Lily said okay. They would rest and then walk down again, slower. They had been heading down the hill for maybe 10 minutes when Macy started bitching again. Lily conceded to walking down the side of the road instead of the rough hiking trail. So there they are, probably looking like a couple of tools geared up for hiking and walking down a crappy road, and after not even 5 minutes, a truck pulled up next to them. It was red, rusty, and generally looked like a clunker. The guy driving rolled down the window and the girls looked in through the passenger side window. He had a big beard, a baseball cap pulled down, and long brown hair. He greeted them and even smiled through his beard, asking if they needed a ride. Macy described him as charming and even cute. Lily says the moment he greeted them, she put her guard up. Despite her better judgment, my stepmom convinced her to get into the truck. It must only be a 10-minute drive down to the car, tops. The two girls opened the passenger door to get into this rusty old thing, and the guy directed them behind the seat to get into the back. They settled in, and the truck started rumbling forward. Lily says that was the point it hit her what a mistake they had made. The back seat was clean enough, but there was a rope on the floor behind the driver's seat and 4 boxes of saran wrap halfway hanging out from under the passenger seat. It seemed creepy and weird, but Lily did not want to freak my stepmom out, so she just kept her mouth shut. After 10 minutes, the woods didn't look any clearer, and they hadn't seen another car the whole time. Lily asked how long he thought it would be. He said he was taking a different route down the hill and had to stop somewhere to get something first. That was it. The girls were 16 and 17, and Lily did not want to press the issue. She was scared, She said she can remember his hair because she was sitting right behind him. He looked like a woodsy guy, but his hair was super tangled and dirty. She noticed crusted mud on his collar and tried to find something identifiable about him, but just got scared the more she picked up on little details. He was youngish, strong looking, and had 1 inch on both of them, so they didn't ask any more questions. He didn't offer any information, and they drove on. Several minutes after that, they reached a tiny shack or log cabin looking place right there in the clearance of the trees. There was an old stump where someone had been chopping wood and a huge axe stuck into the log. Lily was definitely on red alert now. The guy turned off the truck and slipped out of it saying, "I'll be right back. Don't get out." And he disappeared into the house. Lily tried to talk to my stepmom about how she was increasingly uncomfortable, but she mostly dismissed it. Lily started begging, increasingly freaked out, and finally put her foot down, demanding Macy exit the truck with her. So they got out and walked out around the front of the vehicle. The house was about 50 yards in front of them, and they wandered around, looking at it, hesitantly. If this guy really was decent and just trying to give them a ride, it would be super rude to just run off, right? My stepmom had this strict upbringing when it came to manners and public persona, and she saw it as an issue of that nature. So she actually started to head back to the truck, opening the front door to climb in behind the driver's seat. On the driver's side floor, half hidden under the seat, was a big hatchet. It had dried red and brown stains covering the blade and stuck to the floor under it. Lily understandably lost her shit seeing this, and my stepmom started getting hysterical. They decided that leaving was by far the best option at this point and just booked it off the side of the property into the trees. They bumbled around in the trees for a little while until Lily was fairly confident that they were on their way back down the hill. My stepmom cried all the way down. Lily felt bad about it, but was also completely freaked out that he would hear it and kept trying to calm her down. When they finally got back down to the bottom and saw the old wooden fence that surrounded the original parking area, they were relieved. But as they got closer, they saw it, the truck. It was parked on the other side of the gravelly makeshift lot, just sitting there, facing the other way innocently. They couldn't see if anyone was in it, and of course Macy wanted to run for the car, but Lily was super hesitant. She managed to calm my stepmom down, saying she wanted to wait before running out into the open to see what was out there. Remember, this is the 70s, no cell phones. There was no ranger station or anyone around. The parking lot was big, empty, and open. Who knows what would have happened if they decided to stroll across it. Thankfully, Lily convinced my stepmom to chill out, and then the two of them hunkered down against a big tree, hidden by bushes and other trees, then waited it out for what seemed to be a couple of hours when dark started to fall. All the animals started coming out, making noises, and my stepmom started getting antsy about this and began bothering Lily, who was tired and moments away from giving in. She was just planning their dash to the car when they heard a clunk. Across the twilight-lit lot, they watched one of the back doors of their car swing open, and the bearded guy slid his way out of the back seat. He got out, shut the door, looked around the surrounding woods for several moments, and then walked back to his truck. The truck lumbered past the car, out of sight. Several minutes after watching him drive away, they sprinted to their car as fast as they could, jumped in, and peeled out before they even had a chance to shut the doors. If this guy is still alive, he's really old, but still, let's not meet. Before anything, a little backstory. I was 10 at the time and was visiting my hometown of Ecuador for the summer. At the time, I knew just about everyone in my small little town called Alausi, and so did my parents, which is why they let me go on my own that day. Anyways, here's my encounter. Back when I was 10 years old, my family decided to take a visit to my hometown of Ecuador. We went for the summer and planned out just about our whole stay. One day, my mom and dad were getting ready to go to a wedding, and I was in the house with them. My big sister went over to a friend's house, and my other relatives had already left for the wedding. I was supposed to stay at home alone for the duration, but I saw that it was a beautiful day and decided to ask my mom and dad to go to the park, which was no more than 2 blocks away. They were reluctant at first, stating that there would be nobody to take care of me, but I argued that it was a beautiful day out and that there was no way that the park would be empty. They kept getting dressed as I kept arguing until they finally gave in. They said that I can go to the park as long as I was back before dark. I agreed and ran outside to head for the park. It took me no more than 10 minutes to get there, and I was ready to make new friends and play around. But, oddly enough, there was nobody else in the park. It looked abandoned, which was weird seeing how this was one of the only 2 parks in the whole city. It should have been packed, but I paid it no mind. I believe I ran over to the swing set and played around. As I played, I suddenly heard a voice from the distance. A clown was on the other side of the gate and motioning for me to get closer. Behind him was a white van, which I had noticed before but just thought that it was a delivery truck of some sorts. I slowly started walking towards the clown and stopped a good distance away from him. He asked me, in Spanish, "Hey kid, do you like clowns?" I nodded no to him and he gave me that clown frown and then said, "Well, then let me see if I can change that." He opened up his car, and by looking inside, I saw that there was only 2 boxes, though I wasn't sure what they were filled with, and that was it. No seats, no posters, just those 2 boxes and then complete emptiness. Being a child, I still paid no mind to it and watched as he pulled out a deflated balloon. He wrapped his lips around the end and then blew it until it was fully inflated. He tied the end and started to form it into a dog. He showed it to me and I smiled. He then motioned me to get closer, to which I complied. He handed the balloon to me and said, "Do you like it?" I nodded yes this time and gave him a little smile. He then grinned in the creepiest way possible. The grin was so creepy that, even as a kid, I knew to back away a bit. The clown then said that if I wanted to see the rest of his tricks, I would have to get into the truck. I told him that the exit was on the other side of the park, and I wouldn't be able to climb the small gate. He then said the few words that haunt me to this day. "Get a little closer and I'll carry you over. Then we can have loads of fun in my truck. Come on, kid." While saying this, he still had that creepy grin plastered across his face. I merely backed away and told him, "No, it's okay, sir." His grin turned into anger, as though he was annoyed at this. He placed his hands on his hips and said to me, "Oh, but we were going to have so much fun." Right when he said this, I heard a voice from the other side of the park yelling, Son, I'm here to pick you up." I turned and saw a man that I recognized as a local neighbor. He was not my real father, obviously, but the little me knew to run over to him. I said nothing to the clown. I just ran to the man and gave him a big hug. The man waved to the clown and said, "Thanks for keeping my kid entertained." To which the clown replied, "No problem." As we turned around, I was able to hear the man murmur, "Sick fuck." I looked at him and asked, "Sir, what exactly is going on?" He gave a sigh and explained everything. As it turns out, that was no real clown. He was a man that had been kidnapping kids across all of Ecuador. He would lure kids in with a clown costume and then take them away to God knows what place. The people of my town had a feeling he was coming to our town, which is why the whole park was deserted. He said that he was walking by when he noticed that I was talking to the clown and ran over to basically save me. As he told me this, he also dialed for the police to report the incident. We had finally arrived at my house, and this man had said, "Be careful with who you talk to, son. Not everyone is who they see." I gave him one final hug and gave him a thanks for saving me from that sick man. He gave me a rub on the head and said, "It's okay, my boy. Now hurry on in. I have my own things to worry about." I nodded and ran in the house. Nobody was there, and by the time they had returned, I had decided not to tell anyone since I knew they would freak out. It took a while to forget about the whole incident, especially with those words that kept reminding me of him, but I soon forgot until I came across this page, and memories of that clown flooded in my head. I'm not quite sure what happened to the sicko, but hopefully he's now behind bars. Hopefully. So, to that creepy clown from long ago, let's not meet. At the elementary school I went to, there was a tradition for 5th and 6th graders to take a long day trip to Baltimore and Pittsburgh. I can't for the life of me remember which grade went to which place, but that's unimportant to the story. The trip would start around 4 in the morning, and we would typically get home around 1 or 2 the following morning. This encounter happened on the way home from one of these trips. We were maybe an hour and a half away from the school, where we would be dropped off to our parents and guardians. From what I was told, he was probably middle-aged or a little younger, and generally didn't look like a creep, but his behavior showed otherwise. When the group finished eating and started to load back onto the bus, this man finished up his meal and packed up as well. From there, he followed us out of the restaurant parking lot. For about the next hour down the stretch of highway, he basically played chicken with our bus. He would, at turns, swerve in and out of our lane ahead of us, slow down, then speed up. Basically, he was just a creepy, dangerous asshole. Like I said, this happened for about an hour with him basically circling the bus and making it a difficult, nerve-wracking trip. I don't know why it took so long, but eventually one of the teachers decided to call the police and report the guy. At this point, we were on a stretch of highway that was familiar and we were very close to home. Almost as if the man knew one of the teachers had called the cops, he sped up ahead of us and pulled off the highway to a small building. As we passed by, we watched him get out of the car and head toward the building entrance, all the while staring intently at our passing bus. The place he pulled off to was an adult world. I guess he had had enough of playing chicken and wanted to choke it instead. This is my first post, so bear with me. This happened when I was in 1st grade, so 6 or 7 years old. I am in my early 30s, just for context. Every year, the 1st graders took a trip to the zoo, about an hour away from our tiny town. I was a shy little girl, so I spent most of the bus ride staring out the window while the other kids were busy conversing with each other. A Jeep pulls up where I have a clear view into the vehicle, and at the driver, we were on the interstate. I see him playing with something under his shirt, all the while looking at me and then back at the road, back at me and so forth. One hand on the wheel and the other fiddling with whatever was under his shirt. I couldn't keep my eyes off of him, fascinated by what the hell he was hiding. Then he lifted up his shirt, and yep, I got a good look at what he was playing with the whole time. He freaking waved it at me. Granted, I was a little girl and had never seen one before, nor did I understand why he was doing what he was doing. A girl that was near me asked what I was looking at, then she got to see for herself. She started screaming, and I swear to God, all the kids on the bus ran to the windows to see what was going on. The Jeep gunned off, and I'm sure it got off at the next exit. I remember telling my mom about it when I got home, but then I just sort of blocked it out of my mind. It was only several years later, when I had 2 daughters of my own, that I recalled this event. Just last night, I was talking to my mom about it, wishing that I had been more mature and that I had thought to get his license plate number, or something. All I remember is that it was a Jeep or SUV of some type, and that it was a middle-aged white man. So, creepy dude that thinks pleasuring himself next to a school bus full of young children is acceptable. I hope to never meet you again. I live in Vermont and grew up here nearly my entire life. I've always been at home in the woods. It has always made me feel calm, and I've never really feared being in the woods, especially in the daytime. Vermont doesn't have much to fear nature-wise. I don't have the ability to be silent, but I am very aware of my noise level, as well as all of the sounds of the woods. I've had the woods go quiet on me a few times, but if you stop moving, the sounds of the woods come back usually within a minute. Twice I have experienced the woods go absolutely silent and felt uneasy. The first time was when I was hiking with my then girlfriend up at Mount Abe, maybe in 2012. There's a section of the trail that is really unique and beautiful. The woods become less thick and moss covers most of the ground that you can see. We're hiking through this area, the woods go quiet, and we both come to a stop. She asked if I felt that. I said something didn't seem right, but I laughed it off and jokingly attributed the silence to me huffing. We started off again, with her still in front. The quiet didn't end, and I kept feeling like someone was there, looking over my shoulder frequently. This section of the trail isn't terribly long, maybe half an hour, but time seemed to be still as air. We finally got to the intersection of the next trail, and we stopped again. Just up the trail, not 30 feet away, we both saw someone run across the trail and go behind a small dead tree. They poked their head out partially from behind it and retracted back behind the tree. This tree would have been hard for anyone but a child to hide behind. Without thinking, I walked past her, marched over to the tree, and looked around it. Nothing. The woods woke back up almost immediately. I walked back to her and discussed the whole thing. We both felt like this section of the path seemed to take way longer than it usually did. We both noticed how uneasy the silence felt, almost like we were not alone. We both saw someone run behind the tree and peer around. We didn't know what to think, so we tried to laugh it off, then hooked the rest of the way to the peak. We ate, chilled for a bit at the top, and then went back the way we came without anything happening. I've hooked through there after that, and have never had anything happen again. The second time was in the fall of 2016. I was out behind my apartment that had a huge area of woods. The nearest road straight back was a little more than 3 miles east. North and south was maybe 10 miles plus of total woods between roads. So I'm out one day, walking in the woods, maybe a mile deep. It was alive with birds, squirrels, chipmunks, all getting ready for winter. Instantly, the woods go quiet. I stopped to let it wake up, thinking it was me rustling the leaves and downing the twigs. I hear something slowly walking and stops somewhere behind me. I look around. Nothing. The woods stay quiet. I walk a little further, stop again, and once again something is walking, stopping, but still not visible. I did this a few more times with the same result. I begin to get concerned, cut north to make my way down a ravine, and back west. I get out of the ravine and stop once again. The woods are still quiet. I hear something making its way down in heavy landings in the leaves. I book it in a very random zigzag way all the way back to my apartment. Again, I went out after and never experienced that again. The state says we don't have cougars or mountain lions. I think I would have known if it was a bear or coyote early on. After reading a few posts on here, I've decided to add one of the creepier, still unexplained events that happened to me and a group of friends within the past 5 years. Thinking back on it, I still get this unnerved, bad feeling that sort of lingers. Anyways, here it goes. A group of friends and myself rented a place on the lake just for a fun-filled drunken weekend. We were all in our young to mid-20s, and it was supposed to be just a big party. For the most part, that's what it was. The Friday night and Saturday morning, we pretty much went all out and had a blast on the water just doing fun, stupid stuff. Well, naturally, when Saturday afternoon rolled around, we were all so dead from going all out, we decided it would be a night of no drinking, just having a chill evening and night. That's what it was, relaxed. So 9 p.m. comes rolling around, and about 8 of us were inside and 5 outside. The house was a 2-story with a 2nd-story deck/back porch, and it was surrounded by the woods. Then down through the woods, you would then hit the lake. I'll mention that we had already experienced some weird vibes from the locals when we first arrived in town. Mostly just backcountry old-timers that I assumed were leering and irritated because we were a bunch of college-age kids looking to have a good time. But the town and the lake were large, so it's not like anyone knew where we were staying. Anyways, 3 of my friends were on the upstairs back porch. My other friend and I were downstairs, just talking on this little old table near the woods. I mean, it was otherwise just a really nice night. My friend and I were getting lost in conversation, and all of a sudden, there was this weird feeling that encompassed us both. Like an unnerving physical experience that came from the woods behind us. It was so strong, we both kind of quieted down. Then out of nowhere, this loud chanting abruptly came from the woods. I have no idea how far away it was because of the way the lake is set up, but I'm pretty sure the voices carried up through the forest. It sounded like a cult chanting away, and all of the voices were male. I mean, they were so loud and perfectly in sync. I think we were frozen for all of about 20 seconds when I couldn't contain myself and darted towards the house with her following me. I don't know how to explain the feeling that came with that chanting, but it was almost evil, like just something so powerfully uninviting. I was shaking by the time we got up to the second story and ran out onto the balcony with my other 3 friends, one of them being my brother. By the time we got up there, the chanting was gone, and I naturally asked, "Did you guys hear that?" in the most shaky, freaked out voice. They all had heard it, and not seconds later, the chanting began again. So the 5 of us are out there, peering into the forest, listening to this chanting that would sometimes sound far away and then sound relatively close. All male voices in the weirdest language that I don't even know what it was. It sounded like a strange, extreme church. Then, following the chanting, a loud bang, like someone hit a huge metal object, and then the worst part came. A man wailing, like in extreme pain wailing. All of my hair was standing up, and it was the freakiest experience ever. My brother and I were staring at each other in a mixture of scared excitement and horror. The wailing stopped, and then it was back to the chanting, which eventually died out. I was so freaked out by it that I wanted to call the cops because whoever was screaming had been in a lot of pain. That, mixed with the weird chanting, just made me immediately think of some terrible sacrifice going on. One friend tried to say it had to be some drunk guys just messing around, singing and being weird, but no way was that coming from some drunk guys. They were perfectly in sync. Then the bang, then the wail of pain, and then all that weird tension and energy was just gone. No way. I didn't call the cops, and I wish I would have, but honestly, the forest was so large, and since the lake house was up looking down at the woods and the lake, it could have been anywhere. It definitely wasn't in our close proximity, but it was close enough to hear all of that perfectly. We went in and got some of the others, but by the time they came out, the chanting had stopped. Someone wanted to go explore and find where it had been coming from, but obviously that was a stupid idea. After that, I was so ready to go home. I can't explain the relief of driving away from there the next morning. Even now, it gives me the worst feeling. Whatever that was, it felt so wrong and evil. I'll never forget that moment. I can only imagine it was some weird cult stuff. I'm a 17-year-old girl, and a few weeks ago, I was in Walmart with my grandma. We were walking around and shopping and stuff. Your normal Saturday morning errand run. While walking around, I had begun to notice an older man, late 30s, early to mid 40s, in a few of these same aisles as my gram and I. I thought nothing of it since it's a Walmart and it's not that big of a store. At one point, my grandma asked me if I needed any new bras. I told her yeah, and we went to the ladies' underwear section of the store. My grandma went to look at the bras, and I went to go see if they had any matching underwear when I noticed the man again. I was minding my own business when I heard someone walk behind me. I figured it was my gram, so I partly turned to ask how many pairs I could get, but she wasn't behind me. I looked around and saw the guy at the end of the aisle. Whatever, I thought to myself. Maybe he has a wife or a girlfriend, and I went back into my own little world, looking for underwear. I looked for another minute or so when I felt a presence behind me. I looked to my left and saw a little bit of my grandma looking at nightgowns. I decided to stare straight ahead since maybe someone taller than me was just looking at the underwear that was over my head. I'm 5'1". I felt someone kind of press against me. Then I heard the breathing. It was heavy breathing, like someone had just had sex or something and was calming down. I turned on my heels to see the guy who had been following me with his hand down his pants, obviously fondling himself. I literally screamed, "Nanny!" and the guy sprinted away. I told Walmart security, and they told me they had no authority to do anything about it. I can't get the sound of that guy breathing out of my head. I've experienced my fair share of creeps in high school, but there are 2 people in particular that stand out. I'll be referring to the first creep as Clarence and the second as Michael. I should preface this by saying that these two have creeped me out numerous times, and I'll refer to the worst of their offenses as the incidences. Incident 1. In my freshman year of high school, a girl in my choir class introduced me to a friend named Clarence. When I met him, he said that I would make a great specimen to be dissected in his basement. When I was understandably horrified, he followed up with, "Haha, I was just joking." Sure you were, buddy. I didn't talk to him very much after that. He tried to be buddy-buddy with me, and he kept trying to arrange days to hang out, but it was not happening. I was not comfortable hanging with the same guy who made a joke about dissecting me. Incident 2. The girl who introduced me to him gave him my Facebook, and he messaged me. I tried to ignore him, but he was one of those types who would message you every 6 seconds if you didn't respond immediately, so I eventually gave in. Big mistake. He came out to me as bi and confessed his feelings for me. I politely rejected him and told him that I had a boyfriend who I was happy with. I ended the conversation and went to sleep. I got a message from him overnight and was disgusted when I read it the next morning. It was a message of him describing all the things he wanted to do to me sexually that he ended with, "Please don't tell anyone." I immediately blocked him. Incident 3. After blocking him, he made a fake account trying to contact me. His fake name wasn't very different from his real name, so I knew it was him. I tried to tell him for the last time that I didn't want to talk to him and that I'd be blocking him again. He tried to pull the, "If you don't respond, then I'll kill myself." And the conversation devolved into him making jokes about taking advantage of me. And when I confronted him, he pulled the, "It's just a prank, bro," bull crap. I blocked him again and haven't heard from or about him since. Moving on to the bigger creep, Michael. I met him at my bus stop at the beginning of 8th grade year. As soon as I met him, he seemed kind of off. He was extremely annoying and clingy, like I just met him, and he was acting like we'd been friends since kindergarten or something. I tried to ignore him, but what few interactions I did have with him were pretty bad. I should preface this next part by saying, like Clarence, he would try to come over to hang out and arrange sleepovers that never happened. This will all make sense soon. Incident 1. My best friend and I were walking home from the bus stop, and Michael decided to tag along. He tried to awkwardly start conversations and tried to pull the "we should hang out" nonsense, and I came up with even more nonsensical excuses. We eventually parted ways, and I continued my walk home. Once I turned onto my street, I heard footsteps and turned around out of sheer curiosity, and it was Michael. I confronted him and asked why he was following me, and his excuse was, "Oh, I was just trying to go to the store." "Oh, the store? You mean the same store that's a mile in the opposite direction of my house?" I lived in what was basically a cul-de-sac, so there was nothing ahead of us but houses. I told him to leave. He awkwardly turned around and walked in the direction of the store to make it look like he wasn't following me. I'm glad I caught him before he saw exactly which house I lived in. Incident 2. I was on the bus one morning and my best friend was running late, so he wasn't sitting next to me. So of course, Mr. Michael decides to plop down in the seat next to me without asking to sit there like we were actually friends. I pay him no mind until he taps me on the shoulder and says he has something to show me. My curiosity turned to absolute disgust when he showed me the gay porn that I assumed he had been jerking it to the night before. It got worse when he admitted that he was gay and had feelings for me. Not that there's anything wrong with being gay. I'm bisexual myself, but Michael went about it in all the wrong ways. It got even worse when he admitted that the reason he wanted to spend the night with me so badly was because he wanted to seduce me. I was super in the closet, and like most 14-year-old boys, I was convinced that I was the most heterosexual man on earth. So the only way I knew how to react was with pure, unbridled disgust. I didn't talk to him after that, and tried my hardest to avoid him as much as humanly possible. Incident 3. About a year after the bus incident, I was at home watching YouTube when suddenly someone was knocking on the door. The knocks lasted about 30 to 45 seconds, and they got louder and more frequent in between each knock. I assumed it was someone who didn't realize that they were at the wrong house, so I brushed it off. A few minutes later, my mom comes in and asks me, "Hey, do you know the kid who wouldn't stop knocking on our door?" I looked out my blinds and guess who I saw? Freaking Michael. My mom has a very strict rule about not answering the door for strangers and said that when she didn't answer the door, he started pacing up and down our street for about 5 minutes before she asked if I knew him. I told her that he was a stalker and not to let him in. I'm really glad that her cautiousness around strangers didn't allow her to answer the door for him because I did not want Michael knowing where I live. Ever. This last story is a bonus and only consists of one incident because this kid really was a stranger. I didn't even know his name, so I guess I'll call him Homeboy. I didn't include this story in the title since I met him after high school. So, when I graduated high school, my mom sent me to live with my grandmother in a bigger city since there were more job opportunities. My grandmother had a neighbor across the street with a grandson around my age and suggested I should try to make friends with him, and I did. We decided to try and arrange a day to hang out. About 2 months go by and we haven't actually hung out yet. I tried making plans, but he didn't respond very often. When he did, he'd insist on hanging out at his house while his grandmother's at work, which I'm not comfortable with since I don't know him. Finally in August, he invites me to hang out with him at a park at around 10:30 p.m. I should note that we live in a mobile home park with its own park. That's the only reason I was comfortable with it. Otherwise, I would have insisted on another time. When we get to the park, he pulls out a baggie of weed and offers to let me try. I agree because I was intrigued. After a few hits, I am completely baked, and I know it. When I'm sober, I usually talk quickly and can barely be understood, so I knew I was high when I was talking slowly. What I was saying was more concise, and I was pausing or saying in between words more than I usually do. So after about 4 or 5 hits, I'm completely stoned and mentioned how calm I am. I made a joke about being dead on the inside and not feeling anything. Then suddenly Homeboy grabs me by my crotch and says, in the creepiest and deepest tone possible, "I can fix that." I pushed him away and awkwardly laughed. Then he insisted on doing something called a shotgun. It's where you blow weed into someone's mouth, and when he tried to demonstrate, he leaned in like he was trying to kiss me before I shoved him away again. The final straw was him trying to get me to promise to hook up with him if me and my boyfriend don't work out. I was uncomfortable and decided it was time to go, and he walked me home. He asked me if I would ever consider going down on him, and I ignored the question and just tried to change the topic. When I got home, I told all my loved ones, and I blocked Homeboy on Instagram. It's been 2 months, and I haven't seen or heard from him. I think he's moved out of the neighborhood, so I don't have to worry about him anymore. When I told my best friend, she told me that weed can be used as a muscle relaxant, and that he was planning to get me so high that my body couldn't react when he made his advances. It made sense because he kept insisting that I do one last hit before we left, and I said no because I didn't want to smell like weed when I came home. I haven't spoken to any of these people since the incidences that occurred, and I've blocked them all on social media. I have no plans of contacting them in the future and want nothing to do with them. So, to the creepy dudes from high school and Homeboy who tried to take advantage of me in a park, let's never meet again. For some background, I'm a 5'3" female. I used to have my hair colored in bright colors. At the time of the story, it was bright blue, and at the time of these 2 incidences, I was in my early 20s. I live in the central part of Texas, born and raised here. It was a little after I'd first gotten my driver's license when my mom had asked me to run to Walmart in order to pick up some groceries for dinner. I figured, sure, why not? Plus I had just gotten paid. Maybe I could buy something for myself as well. Now, usually when I go shopping anywhere, I always have my phone and headphones with me so I can listen to music while I shop. This day, however, I left my phone at home on its charger. Sucks, but whatever. I wasn't going to take long to get what I needed. As I'm walking through the store, grabbing dinner, I start realizing something was off. I couldn't really understand why, but I started feeling like I was being followed. I looked around me as discreetly as I could and didn't really notice anyone. A few families, some college kids, and then this one guy in a dirty wife beater. I shrugged it off and figured I was just being paranoid, so I continued on my way. But every so often, I'd get that feeling of being watched, so I'd keep looking around and never saw anything weird, except on my journey into the third aisle, I noticed the guy in the dirty wife beater again. He was some older white guy, maybe mid to late 40s. He had short orange blonde hair, a bit of facial scruff, and some sort of facial tic. He looked a little off with his standing and staring. He didn't even have a shopping cart from what I remember, and he just stared at me. I turned back around and figured maybe I was blocking his path. I grabbed my cart and started wandering over where the art supplies were, since I needed a new sketchbook. I could still feel him following me the entire time. At that point, I started getting a little freaked out. I'd never had this happen before, so then I decided I'd try losing him by going through different aisles. At first it worked, and I decided now would be the time to leave, so I head up to the cashier, pay for everything, and make my way out. Then, I suddenly hear someone behind me call out, "Don't leave yet, baby." I looked back behind me because I knew that comment was directed at me, and lo and behold, it was the guy in the dirty wife beater. I just ignored him and booked out of the store. As I make my way to the car though, I keep hearing him behind me saying things like, "Come back," and "I'm talking to you." Thankfully, I managed to get everything in the car and book it out of the parking lot before he got to me. I was shaking by the time I got home. I thought about telling my parents about what happened, but decided not to. I figured it was a one-off thing. Boy, was I wrong. About a few months later, my mom and one of my older sisters went to the same Walmart to do some more grocery shopping. I told no one about the incident from months prior, but I did gain a tendency to carry a pocket knife with me at all times afterwards, just for added safety. So we're walking in, talking about something dumb or about whatever we were supposed to get. I can't remember. When all of a sudden, I looked ahead of us and just froze in my steps. Right in front of us was Mr. Dirty Wife Beater, still looking grungy as all hell and looking straight at me. Mom and my sister had noticed my sudden lack of movement when this guy walks closer, never looking elsewhere besides my face, and starts rambling about my colored hair. "Why did you change your hair? Is it to get men to look at you? 'Cause I'm looking." Those are the words that are still ingrained into my brain. My mom looked at him confused, same with my sister. I was still shocked and tense with just how uncomfortable I was and how scared I felt. I didn't really know what to do. Thankfully, maybe due to my fear, I managed to start power walking ahead of my mom and sister while this guy just kept talking. When I stopped in the baking aisle, my mom and sister asked me what that was all about. I finally told them, and Mom started getting concerned, asking me if maybe I should get security involved. For some reason, maybe my anxiety, I decided not to get security involved. I did end up the entire trip looking over my shoulders constantly to make sure we didn't get followed out to the car. So yeah, crazy and or possibly doped up guy in a wife beater. Let's not meet. This is my first time posting, and this hiking story happened years before I was aware of missing 411 or any strange occurrences happening in the wilderness. I was hiking alone on a semi-popular trail in the Chuckanut Mountain Range in Washington State. Noting, the Chuckanuts do have cougars, bears, coyotes, etc., although I'm not sure that's too relevant to my story. I remember not seeing anyone the entire hike, which was unusual for the area, but I didn't think too much of it. After reaching the viewpoint of this hike, I turned around and was making my way back down sometime in the late afternoon. About 1/4 of the way down, I got that common silence that falls over the forest, with even the light breeze seeming to stop. I turned around and noticed a fern on the ground was moving. I moved closer to see what the cause was, and there was nothing there, and that scared the shit out of me. This fern was standing alone, like not in a thick patch of ferns like you commonly see them, not on a hillside, and I could see all around the fern, including the ground. I was thinking small animal, squirrel or something, but I don't know how to emphasize enough that there was nothing there that could have been hidden or I didn't see. It was slightly off the trail, like 3 feet, so I could circle it and did exactly that. I don't know why I was so drawn to this in the first place, but it was just weird. After about 30 seconds of investigation, things get really fucking freaky. I start hearing a voice, not in English but speaking in an Eastern European language. I couldn't understand it and couldn't tell where it was coming from. I got the chills and the common feeling of someone or something watching me. The voice lasted for about 10 seconds. I also had that feeling like it was coming from all around. At this point, I drew out my pistol because fuck that. I'm slowly backing away from the fern. The voice has stopped, but the forest is still dead. Now I don't know if this was my instinct, a voice I actually heard, or an auditory hallucination from being so freaked out, but something said, run, like a whisper. So I followed this advice. I holstered my pistol and took off down the trail. I didn't see anyone else the entire time I'm sprinting down. I don't know what happened, and I haven't had any other occurrences out in the woods since. For context, I'm a 22-year-old male, and I live in a large city in the Midwest. Now, I drive for Lyft while putting myself through trade school. I drive for other similar companies, but that's besides the point. I have many horror stories from those as well, but I'll tell those another time. It was Christmas Eve of 2020. I was out running Lyft for a few hours before heading to my mom's with my new baby and wife. Nothing special going on for the night, just the usual. I get a ride request. It was a pickup from this kinda lower income apartment complex. No big deal. I arrive and find my passenger. He has all his belongings, several boxes of stuff. Now, my car is a 2006 Chevy Impala, so it's not too big. We get all his stuff loaded up, barely, and we are on our way. During the ride, he is crying, saying his girlfriend was cheating on him, and he had walked in on them earlier that night. He couldn't stay there because it was her name on the lease. So, I was taking him to a hotel. Now, in my city, we have a street that is well known for having vices, hookers, drugs, gangs, weapons, and shady motels, the works. We get to the motel, and he asked me to wait for him to check in and get his key. No problem, man, I say. I'll confess, I break the rules a little when it comes to Lyft. I have a gun hidden in a concealed holster to the underside of my driver's seat for protection. Reason being, driving Lyft and other contract apps, I've had knives and guns pulled on me, as well as people trying to fight me, rob me, and all kinds of other things. But like I said, another time. This motel was on that street I mentioned before. Homeless people were everywhere. There was a dude on the far corner of the complex that still had a needle in his arm, passed out against the building. I'm a big fan of true crime and horror narration, so I'm on edge. He gets his key. The whole motel is ground level, so to help this guy out, I drive to his door. As I mentioned before, he had a lot of stuff, so I started to help him unload it. On my second trip getting stuff, I saw a guy come out of the room just to the south of my car, followed by 2 ladies. They came up to the room I was next to. One of the ladies pounded on the door, then opened it. That's when I saw the guy raise a freaking shotgun out of his long coat and storm into the room. The 2 ladies followed him, slamming the door behind them. Following that, I heard a lot of yelling and shouting. I was just waiting for shots to ring out. Out of nowhere, my passenger came up behind me saying, "I can take this, man. Go ahead and take off. Have a Merry Christmas." And he gave me a cash tip. I didn't even notice he took the boxes out of my hands or slid a $5 bill in my pocket. I was frozen. I knew what may have been going down in that room. I had to leave, or at least get to where I can get my gun. I knew the guy and both the ladies saw me, and I know they knew I saw the gun. I had to get out of there. You know, no witnesses. I got to my car and sped away quickly. I got a block or so away and called the cops. I gave them every detail. After I got off the phone with the police, I signed out a Lyft. I hadn't made much money. But I was done. I got a call later that night. The cops investigated. They never found the gunman or the women, and they never answered the door I saw them come out of. The occupants of the room they went into said nothing had happened and that I was full of shit. Well, I know what I saw. So, to the gunman I saw with the shotgun, who I'm sure was making a statement to someone about a debt, let's not meet again. This happened in 2005 during Christmas vacation. I moved away for college and came back home to visit for the holidays. I spent a week in my hometown in a snowy state. On my last night there, my friend and I decided to go sledding at 3 a.m. We get in our car and both go down a few times. We're both now at the top of the hill. She gets ready to go again, but I stop her. She asked what's wrong, and I tell her that I had a bad feeling. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up, and I felt nervous. I told her we need to leave now. We drive back down to my family home. We lived in a town where no one locked their doors. The crime was almost nothing, and all the neighbors knew each other. When we got back, something told me to lock all the doors. Then, I checked the windows and several were unlocked. My flight was only 4 hours away to go back to campus. I slept for maybe 2. I wanted to see the snow and smell the fresh air, so I stepped outside. I looked at a huge pine tree in the front side of our yard. I always thought the way the snow laid on the branches looked so beautiful, and something caught my eye. What should have been pure, fresh snow was littered in huge man-sized footprints. They wrapped around the tree and went towards the backyard. I was thinking maybe my uncle had been out there smoking or something, just thinking of anything to rationalize why those prints were there. That same feeling came back to me that I had when we were sledding. The anxious and paranoid feeling in the pit of my stomach. I look to my left and I see a man. He is running. He is sprinting, staring straight at me. He was probably close to 300 pounds and maybe 6 feet, and for his size, he was super fast. I froze in fear with the realization he's not just doing a morning jog and he's coming to me. I tried to move several times, but I was almost too scared. With everything in me, I opened my front door, slammed it shut, and locked it. I run to the window and look onto my front porch and see the man standing there. He had his hand on my door. He turns his head and I follow his gaze to a man in a white van. The guy in the van throws his hands up in a gesture to say, "Well?" The runner just threw his hands up and shook his head. The runner walks to the van, gets in, and they drive away. My heart is still pounding, and I wake up my friend and make her walk around the house with me. There, we find footprints that went to every door and window around the house. She too tried to rationalize it, but to me, I know if he had reached me, I wouldn't be writing this post. The malicious look on his face as he ran towards me told me everything. When I was 15, I had an experience after school that truly scared me. I was in my last class of the day and had a habit of always finding ways to get out of class early. I would finish all my work and then some and get a pass to the library. My teachers all liked me and trusted me. I went to the library most of the time, but this time I just took the note, decided not to go, and went downstairs to wait for my friend Ashley. I was waiting inside the school round, as everyone called it, where students would hang out before and after school. I was sitting on one of the benches, organizing papers and whatnot. No one else was around because everyone was still in class. All of a sudden, an acquaintance of mine, Ian, started walking towards me. He had a friend with him, but I didn't know him. Ian, Ashley, and I would sometimes ride the same bus together. We would talk and goof off, but I didn't know him all that well. I remember he always wore black with a black trench coat, but that doesn't really matter because a lot of goth kids did that. So Ian and his friend came up to me and started talking. We were just normally talking, but then I remembered I needed to go get something from my locker. I told Ian I had to go and would see him later. As I started to get up, he stood over me, blocking me from getting up. He said, "You're not going anywhere until I ask you something first." I wasn't afraid at this point because I just thought he was playing around. I asked him what it was that he wanted to ask me, and he said that he wanted me to go with him to the Winter Wonder Ball coming up. I told him I wasn't planning on going at all because I'm not into those things. So I stood up anyway, which made me get directly in front of him, and I sidestepped him to get some distance. He then grabbed both of my arms behind my back and held them tightly as he kept saying, "You're going to come with me. I'll make you." At this point, his friend was getting a little nervous and started to tell Ian to back off, that this was going too far. I told Ian to let me go and that I had to leave. He then pinned me up against the wall. He let go of my arms behind my back, then just made me face him while his arms were pinning me there. He started talking to his friend and cracking jokes about what he could do to me while no one's around. He then began to touch my waist with his left hand and slowly moved his hand up to touch my breast. I was very scared at this point, but I was trying not to show it because I didn't want it to escalate or make him mad. I told him to let me go, and I looked at his friend. His friend had pity on me and sternly told Ian to let me go. He came up and pried him off of me. As I began walking away, Ian tried to grab my arm again, but I kept dodging his grasp until the teacher rounded a corner and began to walk towards us. That was enough to get him to stop. As I was walking faster away from him, I heard him call out, "I will see you soon, babe." I rushed out of the building and got on a different bus to avoid seeing him. My heart was beating so fast. I was also shocked and confused about what just happened. After that incident, I never talked to him again. He would avoid taking the bus and avoided all of the places he knew I'd be, which was perfectly fine by me. I also found out that shortly after the incident, he got heavily involved in drugs and alcohol and beat up his stepmom. I talked to him last year on Facebook, but I ended up blocking him because he began saying perverted comments to me and started asking me out. No thank you. So, high school creep who pinned me down, let's never meet again. My sister and I needed to go to Walmart to pick our mom up some groceries. We were in the freezer aisle when I looked up and noticed a man staring at me. Me being me, I said, "That man must think I'm cute because he won't quit staring at me." We didn't think much else of it. We continued our shopping when I noticed him staring at me again, this time in a different aisle. I was starting to get creeped out. I told my sister maybe we should try going into a completely different part of the store. We went into women's clothing. He followed. Electronics. He followed. Realizing how scary this was, we decided to hurry up and check out and leave. We were relieved when we didn't see him as we were checking out. We were headed for the doors and the coast was clear. I turned my head right as we were exiting the store, and there he was. He came out of the bathroom, right in front of where we checked out at. I knew he saw me, so we hurried up to go to the car and put our groceries away. Of course, his vehicle was parked a few spots away from ours. We just sat in the car with doors locked. We eventually decided to leave, and when we did, he began backing out as well. He was obviously following us. We parked in a different spot. Sure enough, so did he. I told my sister we should cut through one of the parking lots to get to the main road a different way. Luckily, this man got stuck behind a line in traffic waiting to leave Walmart as we were hurrying away. I'm not sure what his true intentions were, but I was later told how popular sex trafficking was in that area. So, creepy Walmart stalker, let's not meet, ever, again. I live in South Georgia, so things here can be really shady. I go to this Walmart all the time, and I've never had problems with it whatsoever. I'm a 21-year-old male, so it's kind of weird that I was followed anyways, but here we go. I went shopping for some groceries, doing my usual thing. It was around 8:30 p.m. by the time I had got done checking out. As I was walking out of the store, I noticed this older gentleman staring at me, all creepy-like. I just brushed it off until I noticed he was out in the parking lot, staring as I was putting my groceries in my car. I decided to hurry up the pace. I can defend myself. I'm a pretty muscular guy, but I don't like violence that much. I got in my car, started to drive away, and I thought that was that. I get about a mile down the road when this black pickup starts riding my bumper. I slowed down and went off the road a little to let him pass. He didn't. He kept pace. I finally brake checked him, and he passed, but as he was doing that, I noticed it was the same old man. When he passed me, he brake checked me and tried to make me stop my car. This went on for 10 minutes until I got very aggravated, passed him, and sped off. I finally get home, go inside, and start to chill out when my Ring camera goes off. I looked at the video from my phone, and this dude was on my porch. I called the cops. They came, but he was gone, so there was nothing they could do. This happened last night. I'm very creeped out about the experience, so I thought I'd share. A couple years ago, I worked at this 24-hour diner. Sometimes I worked the night shift. One day, I was at Walmart after an afternoon shift I worked in my painfully recognizable uniform. The guy in front of me had these crazy eyes and was taking his sweet time bagging up his groceries, and he said hi, so I said hi back. He was like, "Oh, so you work at..." And I was like, "Yep." He left the store and I bagged my groceries and walked out a couple minutes later. Well, the guy was outside and saw me get in my car. He didn't follow me though, or so I thought, and that was that. So fast forward 2 weeks. I'm working the night shift and it's 2 a.m. I was sitting outside, smoking a cigarette and talking on the phone. This white van pulls up, and guess who hops out? He was like, "Hey girl, I've been looking for you. You remember me? Do you?" His eyes were bugging out of his head. He had a few of his buddies in his van. I stuck the phone in my pocket. He grabbed my wrist and started pulling me to the van and says, "Oh, come hang out with us." I was like, "Fuck no, dude." I yanked away and started backing towards the door, and he kept asking if he could at least get my number. I just ran inside to the back and told my almost 7-foot-tall coworker about the situation, but they drove off. 2 nights later, one of the windows was shot out with a BB gun during a night shift that I wasn't working. But my coworker said that it was a bunch of dudes who drove by in a white van. This happened when I was in my 2nd year of college. 7 guys, including myself, went camping, and I want to share with you what happened. We had this friend in the group who came from the countryside. He said to us that he knew of some little-known place out in the mountains where we could all hang out during our summer vacation. He said that we would get to camp out by the mountain stream, so we piled into 2 cars and headed out to the place he recommended. We drove for 3 hours. Our countryside friend told us that once we got on the highway, it would only take about an hour, and even then, when we got off the roads, we would have to hike a mountain trail. It took about 30 minutes, but it felt like forever after that long drive. Some of those mountain roads were so narrow and overgrown that I was praying no one was coming in the opposite direction. One of the friends in my car remarked how overgrown it was, to which my countryside friend replied, "Yeah, no one knows about this place." It felt good, you know, like we were on an adventure. After a while, the mountain stream our friend promised came into view. It was amazing. It was surrounded by mountains and it felt like we owned it. I don't know if that sounds a little arrogant, but that's how I felt. There was even a waterfall, and it wasn't a small stream. Maybe I should call it a river. It was wide in parts. We were all alone. I mean that in the sense that we felt completely off the grid. I liked the idea until I noticed a building jutting out of the mountains on the west. It looked like a school. We settled in after pitching our tents and had some lunch. We played around in the river, and when the sun began to set, we lit a campfire and drank. However, the snacks and the booze ran out quicker than we had anticipated, so we split up. One team went on a booze recon mission, and the others minded our campsite. This happened at around 10 p.m. I didn't volunteer to go to the store. I was fine with just sitting around. We had no torches. We watched as our friends head off under the watchful light of the moon in one of the cars. We turned on the headlights of the other car so we could have some light. The stars were beautiful, and the night was filled with the chirp of the insects and the steady flow of the mountain stream. One of my pals broke the silence and said, "What's that?" I looked in the direction he was facing. He looked at the school and I saw that there was some kind of light coming from over there. It looked to me like someone was walking around with a flashlight. We spoke among ourselves. Someone said that they thought that there were some people out there doing some urban exploration. Someone else said that they only saw one flashlight, so they doubted it. For the briefest of moments, it felt like the flashlight landed on us. We weren't far away enough to not be seen. Then the light went out. I figured that it was probably just a security guard or a janitor, but my countryside friends said that the school was closed. We were all in high spirits, but now our enthusiasm was drifting away. We all fell silent. It was already past midnight and our friends hadn't come back from the store yet, so two others from our group said that they would go and search for them in the other car. Without the headlights, we could only rely on the campfire for light. My friend and I were the only ones left at the campsite, and after a few moments he turned to me and asked, "Sorry, but can I go to sleep before you? I am so tired, man." He didn't wait for my reply. He just went into one of the tents nearby and settled down for the night. It sounded like he fell asleep almost instantly. I was alone. I watched the campfire. It was getting pretty creepy out there in the middle of nowhere. Our gang of 7, now down to just 1. Me. After a few minutes, I noticed something. I saw a light coming from the direction where we had entered in our cars. I didn't see headlights though. The light looked like it was about 100 meters away. I realized that it was coming from the woodland trail. It looked like it could be a flashlight. I started to get a little worried. I kicked dirt over the fire and then climbed into the closest tent. Unfortunately, it wasn't the one my friend went to sleep in. I put a sleeping bag around me. I had a bad feeling about whatever was approaching, but I kept my eyes on that light. I hoped that it wouldn't notice our campsite. I could see it move as if it was handheld. I started to wonder if it was the janitor or the urban explorer we saw earlier at the school. I wondered why the hell someone would be out here in the middle of the mountainous forest at this time of night. I piled up some bags around me to create a little barrier, and then I stayed as still as I possibly could. I was sure whoever was out there wouldn't approach a tent that was zipped up. Surely they'd realize that someone was asleep or camping. I was wrong. I heard footsteps approach the front of the tent, followed by a chilling sound of someone unzipping the tent door. Then an old raspy voice spoke. "You're not here either." I had goosebumps. I realized that it wasn't some janitor from the school. The voice belonged to an old woman. The old woman left my tent, then approached the tent that my friend was sleeping in. I didn't dare open my eyes, but I could hear her muttering something as she passed by. I knew that I wouldn't be able to catch a wink of sleep that night after this mysterious old woman decided to visit our tents. I lay there, with sweat amassing my brow, listening to the distant flow of the stream and the steady chirp of the night insects, praying for morning, praying for light. It was a long night, but when the first rays of morning light illuminated my tent, I got up and went to see if my friend was all right. Thankfully, there was no one out there. I looked in the tent and saw that he was sleeping. I decided not to wake him. Neither of my friend's cars came back that night. I started to get very worried for them, but after about 10 minutes, I saw them both return to our campsite. I asked them what happened, and they said that the first car got a puncture, and the second car which went to look for them got lost on the mountain roads. I told them all what happened last night, and no one believed me. We were set to camp out again that night, and they all thought I was just trying to scare them. I didn't want to stay there for another night, but I had no choice. I didn't drive out there. I got a ride, and it wasn't like I could just walk back home by myself. I reluctantly spent another night out there. It was an uneventful night, and the following morning we all piled into the cars and headed back home. I purposely sat next to my friend who went to sleep early that night. The old lady came to our campsite. He hadn't mentioned anything about it, and I wanted to know if he slept through it, or if he didn't want to tell the others because they hadn't believed me. I said to him something like, "Did you hear what I said happened on the first night? I bet you're glad you went to sleep early, huh?" "I wasn't asleep," he replied. He said that, like me, he decided to stay as silent as possible. He said that the old woman actually went inside his tent, grabbed him, and shook him. He opened his eyes a little and saw that he wasn't dreaming, and terror gripped him. He saw the old woman looming over him and attempted to shake him awake. He was so scared, but he said that he couldn't do much else but pretend to be asleep. She was mumbling the whole time. He said he couldn't make out many words, but he said he will always remember one sentence. The old woman said, "I don't know where my children have gone." Many years have passed since that summer, but I wonder if she's still out there. Even though I don't know if her intentions were either good or bad, I somehow feel for the old lady. That poor woman sounded as if she had been out in the woods for a while. I always think about that night whenever summer rolls around. A little backstory leading up to this meeting. I grew up in a shady area and would rarely leave home after 7 to 8 p.m. as it is considered dangerous. Going into high school, I got a pit bull. He was a gentle giant who loved everyone and everything. He had some protection work training before he joined our family, but as he was getting older, he retired and I took him home with me. So back to the story. At this time, I am 17, short, blonde, but very aware of my size. Having a big, scary dog, I finally felt safe walking alone, and on that very night, I had set out to take a longer walk as my dog, let's call him Meatball, really needed to run off some energy. I took him to the woods near my home, and we walked along a gravel path that was partly lit. It was around 11 p.m. and quite dark outside. As we walked, I became aware of the fact that there really wasn't anyone else around. We walked for about 10 to 15 minutes before a man turned up behind us. We continued to walk, and I noticed he's taking the same turns as me and Meatball. I sped up, feeling my heart beating in my chest. Meatball, who normally spent his time sniffing at the end of the leash, was now also very aware of the situation. He had slowed down and gotten so close to my leg with full focus on this man. I started turning at every turn I could, and the man followed, even though we were now walking in circles. He started getting closer and closer to us, as I am now sure he is following us. I remember something my father once told us. Never let someone follow you, as you are most vulnerable from behind. If you get in a situation where you can, force your stalker to pass you. I stopped, grabbed onto Meatball's leash, and I leaned back on the leash, acting as if I had to put my entire body weight into holding him back. Now, I am aware that at this point in my life, I looked small and weak, but as my father is an old veteran, I could fight before I could walk. Even holding Meatball back was not a task, as I was a lot stronger than I looked. Well, I called out, trying to sound as naive as I could, hoping that if I did have to fight, I would surprise him with my strength. "Excuse me, my dog really does not like people, and I can't really hold him back when he lunges. If I step to the side, could you pass us so I have a chance at holding him back?" As I say this, Meatball starts barking, growling, and snapping towards the man. He has now stopped, looks me up and down, stares at Meatball, then turns around, not saying a word. He left quickly, and I called my parents and asked them to meet me, as I now realized he could easily be hiding anywhere on our walk back. My dad showed up only a few minutes later, baseball bat in hand. Nothing really happened, but after being followed by this man at every turn I took for the last 35 minutes, I know this could have ended really badly if I had not had Meatball or my dad close by. My grandfather, Jim, died when I was 17, around 5 years ago. His last months were rough on the whole family. He had advanced brain cancer but spent most of his time at home under hospice care. One afternoon, I was alone with my grandpa waiting for the hospice nurse to come check in on him. A man who I'd never seen before, Dave knocked on the door. He was wearing hospital scrubs but hadn't brought any equipment with him, which was odd. I asked him if he worked for the hospital, and he nodded. He said this was his first shift with Jim, but that he reviewed my grandfather's file and that he wanted to speak with whichever family member had the legal authority to pull the plug on my grandfather. I should say that I live in a right-to-die state where euthanasia is legal, so it's not like that option never occurred to us. But as far as I know, no member of my family had ever expressed an openness to euthanize Jim. I told him that I had no authority to make that decision, and that my grandfather had specifically said to prolong his life indefinitely unless he was crying out in extreme pain. Dave put his hand on my shoulder as though he were consoling me, and talked about how old people become burdens that their families need to let go of. Then Dave pulled a bottle of pills from his pocket and said they were barbiturates that would trigger a peaceful end. He said the coroner would determine that Jim died naturally from his cancer. I started to panic. I firmly told him that under no circumstances would we be euthanizing Jim at this time, but he started to untwist the bottle as he walked towards his bed. I tried to wrestle the pills from his hand, and he seemed startled. He played innocent and said he just wanted to show the pills to Jim. Dave knew perfectly well that my grandfather had almost no idea what was going on. I called 911 and rapidly explained the situation to the dispatcher. Dave suddenly became very scared and bolted out of the house. The cops arrived within 5 minutes, and Jim's actual hospice nurse arrived a few minutes after that. Based on my physical description, the police and hospital staff were able to identify Dave as a recently fired hospital orderly. Dave was charged with making a criminal threat based on my testimony, but unfortunately he was acquitted. So Dave, wherever you are, let's never meet again. This happened when I was a junior/senior in college. I knew John through my intro creative writing class. He always sat across from me and complimented me on my beautiful writing style, my clothes, my hair, my everything. At first I liked it. I was young, easily impressed, and a cute boy was telling me how awesome I was. After the first few classes, it started to get old. He would ask me out on dates, then act offended when I told him I was seeing someone. He would still do it, even after I told him to stop. He even wrote a poem about how awesome my hair was, which seemed weird to me. All of his stories involved a beautiful punk girl named Danny who was in love with him. I went by Annie at the time. John was eventually moved to another class, and I thought, this is the end of it. I didn't see John for weeks. My dorm room was on the first floor. I was sitting on the bed when someone tapped on my window. I opened the blinds to see John standing there. He asked me to let him in. I got the RA. John did it another time, in the middle of the night. The RA let me move to a dorm on the second floor. When I left for the summer, I thought about not coming back, but I had a year left and I wanted to graduate with my friends. I changed my hair back to brown, cut it short, and bought new clothes. Part of it was to update my wardrobe and look for potential jobs. Another was to make sure John couldn't find me in a crowd if he tried. I went back and a lot of people didn't recognize me. I was in a whole new dorm. Classes kept me busy all day, and I didn't see John until 3 weeks before I was set to graduate. I was ordering coffee in the student store when I heard someone call my name. John was standing there, looking like someone murdered his beloved dog in front of him. "Your hair!" he said, sounding shocked. "Why would you do that to your beautiful hair? Your hair was the one thing I loved about you," he said. "Now you look like everyone else." I shrugged, told him to leave me alone. He just stood there, shocked, until finally storming out. He shouted over his shoulder, "This is not how it was supposed to go." I never saw John again. In the fall of 2010, I decided to go back to college. I was a single mom of 3 boys, but they were all in school now and me going back was finally possible. The school I went to is a regional campus to a very large university and located in a neighborhood that is known for crime, meth, heroin, prostitution, etc. But it was only a 20-minute drive from my home, and I didn't feel unsafe about going there. The first day and first class were intimidating. I didn't know anyone and was a lot older than most of the students. I was 28 at the time. I sat down in the back of the room at a table, and a few minutes later, a lady who was around my age sat down next to me. She was very skinny, smelled like cigarettes, greasy hair, sunken eyes, but she started to talk to me and seemed normal enough. She started off the conversation telling me that she chose to sit next to me because I was wearing the prettiest blouse in the room. Strange, but as an awkward person, I leave a lot of leeway for people to say or do awkward things before I think too deep into them. She didn't have a backpack, any books, a pen, notebook, nothing. She said her financial aid hadn't come through yet, but she didn't want to fall behind on classes and asked could she share my book. I agreed and gave her a pen and paper also. After the class, she asked if I would mind going to the library with her so she can scan some of the pages to take home. I agreed and we started to head to the library. She stops, looks at her phone and says her son just texted and needs her to come home to do something. She asks if I'll come with her. I tell her I have another class shortly and can't go with her. I ask if she still wants to go to the library first. She says no, that she has to go and get to her son, but really can't go alone. I keep telling her I cannot go with her, and she starts crying. At this point, we were in a common area outside and the parking lot was to one side and the library to the other. I tell her I need to go to the library and she is welcome to come, talk, whatever she needs, but I have to go. I didn't like being outside away from people with this woman anymore and was trying to get back to the busier area. She gets really upset, starts screaming, basically says fuck you to me. She may have actually said that. I can't remember how the interaction went exactly because I was frozen in confusion by how quickly she transitioned from friendly, then to crying and scared, and now screaming in my face a slew of hateful and angry things. I turned around to start walking to the library and called my friends so that I would have someone aware if this lady tried anything more than just screaming. I get to the library vestibule and watch her through the glass doors. She is standing at the parking lot, then a car pulls up with a man in it, and he is obviously upset with the woman. They're arguing, but I cannot hear them from inside the vestibule. Eventually, she gets in the car and leaves with him. The next day, I was dreading class because I didn't know what this woman's attitude would be like. But she wasn't there that next day. In the end, she never came back to class. I didn't know her name, or at the time how to look at the class roster. But looking back, I'm fairly certain she was not enrolled at the school at all, and for whatever reason, was trying to get me to leave with her. I wish I knew her intentions, but at the same time, I'm glad I never had to find out.